Welcome back to the continuation of our reading of A Nation in Distress by Michael Masanga. We now enter Chapter 1, Part 1, titled Foundation for Independence, The Struggle for Self-Rule. In this chapter, we delve into the early beginnings of Zimbabwe's quest for independence, exploring the struggles and triumphs of those who paved the way for self-rule. Chapter 1, Foundations of Independence. Part 1, The Struggle for Self-Rule. The story of Zimbabwe's independence is a narrative steeped in heroism, conflict, and a deep-seated desire for self-rule. Prior to its independence in 1980, Zimbabwe was known as Rhodesia, a name derived from Cecil Rhodes, the British imperialist whose legacy was marked by the pursuit of diamond and gold wealth. The colonial era under British rule had established a system where the minority white population controlled the majority of fertile lands, wealth, and power, setting the stage for racial tensions and economic disparities. The seeds of nationalism. Nationalistic sentiments began to coalesce in the early 20th century, but it was in the 1960s that the real push for independence gained momentum. This period saw the emergence of various nationalist parties, including the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, led by Robert Mugabe, and the Zimbabwe African People's Union, ZEU, headed by Joshua Nkomo. These parties, though differing in tactics and tribal affiliations, shared the common goal of ending white minority rule. The political landscape of this era was fraught with challenges. The white-led government, realizing the growing unrest, declared independence from Britain in 1965 without transferring power to the black majority. This unilateral declaration, led by Prime Minister Ian Smith, only intensified the nationalistic fervor, prompting increased guerrilla warfare from groups like ZANU and ZAPU. The ensuing conflict, known as the Rhodesian Bush War, was both brutal and protracted, involving numerous battles that left deep scars on the nation's psyche and infrastructure. International involvement and pressure. The struggle for independence in Rhodesia was not isolated. It drew considerable attention and involvement from neighboring countries and the broader international community. Countries like Mozambique and Zambia provided sanctuary and support to Zimbabwean nationalists. Meanwhile, global powers, including the United States and the United Kingdom, were under pressure to facilitate a resolution that would end minority rule and establish a government based on majority rule. The Lancaster House Agreement, signed in London in December 1979, marked the culmination of these efforts. This agreement, mediated by the UK, laid out the terms for ceasefire and planned for democratic elections. Crucially, it also set the stage for a transition to majority rule and guaranteed certain protections for the white population, aiming to foster a peaceful and inclusive transition. The dawn of independence. The general elections held in February 1980 were a watershed moment for Zimbabwe. Under the watchful eyes of international observers, Robert Mugabe's ZANU party won a decisive victory, paving the way for the official declaration of independence on April 18, 1980. Mugabe's ascension to power was seen as a victory for the long-oppressed majority, and his inaugural address promised reconciliation and unity. Zimbabwe's independence was celebrated across Africa and the world as a triumph over colonialism and a hopeful beginning for a country endowed with vast natural resources and a resilient population. In retrospect, the independence of Zimbabwe was not just the end of colonial rule, but the beginning of a complex journey towards self-determination. The initial years were filled with optimism and the promise of leveraging the country's resources for the benefit of all its citizens. However, as the subsequent chapters will detail, the legacy of colonialism, combined with internal political dynamics, would pose significant challenges to the young nation's aspirations for democracy and prosperity. Thank you for listening to this chapter of A Nation in Distress by Michael Masanga. We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking. If you enjoyed this chapter, be sure to subscribe to Zimwaves TV on YouTube. By subscribing, you'll be notified whenever a new chapter or part of this audiobook is published, ensuring you don't miss a single installment. Stay tuned for the next part of A Nation in Distress, where we'll continue our journey through the heart of our nation's story. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, the future is ours to shape.